Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we get to compare two different iPhones that are actually technically predecessors and successors of each other's, but they weren't really necessarily in the same demographic in a lot of ways. Those two phones are the iPhone X and the iPhone XS Max, and I want to see how they compare in 2020. Now, obviously, if size doesn't matter, then maybe you want to go for the bigger phone maybe, or the smaller phone. It really doesn't matter. If you like smaller phones, obviously go for the iPhone X. If you like bigger phones, then go for the iPhone XS Max. But I will tell you, if you have all the money in the world to spend and all that stuff, the XS Max might be the better way to go, mostly because of the potential of longer software support, which is kind of a caveat I'll get into in a second, but also the bigger screen, the bigger battery life, things like that. You might actually end up liking those things more than the iPhone X, but we'll kind of get into the nitty gritty later. But in terms of the pricing structure right now in 2020, first of all, you can't get any of these phones brand new at the Apple Store, so that's a pretty big caveat in 2020, but I feel like I'm going to say caveat so many times in the video. I say one word and I keep saying it. The iPhone X on Amazon right now, the cheapest model is selling for about $420. The iPhone XS Max, however, is selling for about $580. So a little bit of difference right there, and that iPhone XS Max is actually on the low end. I've been seeing a lot more go for around 600-ish. So in my opinion, the pricing structure between these, definitely the iPhone X is the cheaper one, and there might be some huge advantages for the iPhone X, which I'll get into in a second. But looking on the front, the iPhone X has a 5.8-inch Super Retina OLED display. That resolution is 1125 by 2436, and it's a pretty good panel. It has a lot going for it. This is the first time we saw an iPhone with the least amount of bezel with the notch and everything, and that newer type of design. So that structure has pretty much been rolled over to every other iPhone since then. I mean, even the iPhone 11 Pros have that same exact concept, but maybe with the iPhone 12s we'll see something different. Whereas on the iPhone XS Max, same exact setup, but a 6.5-inch Super Retina OLED display as well, and this one is 1242 by 2688. So technically a bigger panel, but it is a higher resolution, but it doesn't really look like it. Like when you're messing with it, they look almost like the exact same panel, so it's not really that big of a difference. But both panels are really good. I like both panels for sure. On the bottom, lightning ports, no headphone jacks on either of these phones. On the back, glass back, which feels really nice with that dual camera setup. And when you're holding both phones in the hand, they definitely do feel like about the same thing. One doesn't necessarily feel more premium than the other. However, the XS Max might give the little impression that it is better because it is bigger, and that kind of like, with the plus models, you kind of already assume that it's more expensive. So that is one thing that kind of goes to the back of your head, but it's like a subconscious thing. It's not that big of a deal. So in terms of the way they feel on the outside, almost exactly the same. Really the only difference is the XS Max has that gold color, which I love. The XS has the same color too, but the iPhone X only came in space gray and white. So it is what it is. It's not really that big of a deal. But now, interestingly enough, both phones have IP certification, but they're a little different. The iPhone X has the IP67 dust and water resistance. You can go up to 1 meter of water for 30 minutes. The iPhone XS Max has IP68 dust and water resistance. So you can go up to 2 meters of water for 30 minutes. I kind of started there. Not a big deal, not a big difference, but if you're someone who's more active, the iPhone XS Max might have the better advantage for sure. Now that kind of covers it up there. Now hitting on the software. Now this is going to be a doozy, and it's going to be a lot of conspiracy, so you gotta hang out with me for a second. The iPhone X started off with iOS 11.1.1. We are able to upgrade it to iOS 13.3, but the iPhone XS Max came out with iOS 12, and it is upgradable right now to iOS 13.3, actually 13.3.1, which is the latest version. Now in terms of the software, everyone would probably think the iPhone XS Max would last longer than the iPhone X, and I kind of agree with you there, but because the iPhone X didn't start off with exactly iOS 11, it started off with a later version of iOS 11, I would assume that it's probably not going to last as long as the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. I think this phone, the iPhone X, is going to last as long as the XS and XS Max. Now maybe the 8 and 8 Plus can follow the iPhone X as well. They have the same chipset, so it makes sense. But right now, as the way I see it, I'm pretty sure the iPhone X at least will last as long as the iPhone XS and iPhone XS Max. Okay, now there's no way to verify that. It's literally just an opinion. But if I had to say it, I think I would probably go that route. But there could be a way that the iPhone X doesn't last as long as it. But even if that's the case, the iPhone X and XS Max still have a couple more versions of software for sure. So these things are not going anywhere anytime soon. But the biggest revelation and the biggest change that has happened in the last couple months between even the iPhone XS and the iPhone X and the XS Max would be that checkering jailbreak, and this is where both these phones are really divided. So there's an unpatchable jailbreak that just came out a couple months ago, and basically you can jailbreak a certain select amount of iPhones in any version of iOS, which is really, really awesome. Now the cutoff point is at the iPhone 10. Any iPhone really below the iPhone 10 and above the iPhone 5s, you can actually jailbreak using this checkering jailbreak. However, the iPhone 10s Max is not compatible with this, so it isn't that big of a deal if you're not going to jailbreak your phone. That doesn't really matter. But if you are even thinking about it, then the iPhone 10 actually might have the better advantage for you. So it's not a deal breaker for me. Like, it's not that big of a deal. I don't jailbreak my main phones, but I have done it in the past, which is kind of funny. It's kind of hypocritical for me to say, but it is something to keep in mind. If you're someone who wants to jailbreak your phone, the iPhone 10 might have that better advantage, and it does have a little bit more of a development community behind it over the iPhone 10s Max. So that's one thing to keep in mind, but it's not that big of a deal. So that kind of covers it up in the software standpoint. Now, hitting on the performance, the iPhone 10 came out with the Apple A11 Bionic chip, a hexa-core CPU, and there were two different models of the iPhone 10, a 64 and 256GB model, and both those models had 3GB of RAM, where the iPhone 10s Max had the Apple A12 Bionic chip, a hexa-core CPU, and three different models, a 64, 256, and 512GB model, and all three of those models had 4GB of RAM. So you're getting an additional gigabyte of RAM on the iPhone 10s Max over the iPhone 10. And what I can tell you about the performance between them is, first of all, the iPhone 10 I feel like is still a very good performing phone. Really, whenever I pick it up, whenever I do speed tests, whenever I do anything, it's really what I expect. You know, it's not the fastest thing in the world, but it's not the slowest thing in the world. And both phones, in my opinion, handle really, really well whenever I'm doing anything with them, especially with the iPhone 10. It seems to be perfectly fine. I don't really think there's that big of a deal. On the iPhone 10s Max though, it is a little bit smoother, and I had just installed the iOS 13.4 beta yesterday on it, and for some reason that thing was flying. Like, it was like super fast for me. I wasn't expecting it. But the iPhone 10s Max, I think, is the smoother and just faster phone overall. And generally, whenever I use a phone, I use it for like basic tasks. I just open things, close things, whatever. Like, it's not a big deal. I tend to not keep a lot of apps in the background anyway, so there's not a lot of apps to be refreshed or for them to close. So with the iPhone 10s Max, I use it when I did use it for a little bit for just swiping through things whenever I make videos on it. It does exactly what I needed to do, and it's a very, very good performing phone. And the iPhone 10 is pretty much there. Like, if the iPhone 10s Max was like a 10 out of 10, the iPhone 10 is probably like an 8.5 out of 10, maybe even like a 9 out of 10. But if your use case and your usage gets a little bit higher, if you tend to keep a lot of apps in the background and things, the iPhone 10s Max might do you better in the long run. Things like the iPhone 11 Pro, these have the same amount of RAM as the iPhone 10s Max, so you're really not missing out too much if you go for a 10s Max in terms of RAM management and performance side. So that is definitely one thing to keep in mind. So in terms of the performance, that pretty much covers it up there. Now, hitting on the camera, both phones have dual camera setups, and you know what, I'll be honest, they're pretty much like the exact same camera. On the front, 7 megapixel sensors. Really, the only difference between the front camera and even the whole entire video resolution filming frame rate would be the iPhone 10s Max can shoot 1080p at 60 frames on that front camera, where the iPhone 10 can only shoot 1080p at 30 frames, which is probably still good enough for a lot of people. Now, hitting on that back camera, both phones can do 4K at 60 frames, both phones can do 1080p at 240. Really, the only difference is like the quality might be a little bit better on the 10s Max, but even that's not that big of a deal. I think the 10s Max has like night mode or something like that has an additional feature over the iPhone 10, but really it's not that big of a deal. They're both almost the exact same camera, which is not a bad thing. Both phones have very, very good camera sensors. Whenever I did anything with my iPhone 10, it had a very good camera. The iPhone 10s Max, even in some certain lighting conditions that weren't the best, still handled it fine, which was really cool. So in terms of the camera sensors, I think they're both almost exactly the same. There's not a big difference between both, so that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the camera. Now, hitting on the battery, both phones have pretty different sized batteries. The iPhone 10 has a 2716 mAh battery. The iPhone 10s Max has a 3174 mAh battery. Now, between them, the iPhone 10s Max for sure has better battery life, but surprisingly, it's not by much. It's not as much as you would think. Like, yes, for sure, the iPhone 10s Max with that bigger battery is better, but the thing is though, is that because of that bigger screen, the high resolution, even though it's not by much, that is one thing to keep in mind. It's more heavy performance. It's better in performance than the iPhone 10. But the iPhone 10's battery life was always pretty good for me. I ended up using a battery charging case for a while, and both phones, I mean, they're pretty good. iPhone 10s Max's standby time is very good. So is the iPhone 10's. Now with the 11 Pro Max, that one has extremely good battery life. The iPhone 10s Max's better for sure, but it's not like a crazy amount. It's probably like a little bit better, but it's not as much as you would think. So to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you save some money and get the iPhone 10, or should you spend more money and get the iPhone 10s Max? Now, what I can tell you, in my opinion, I think you should probably save some money and get the iPhone 10. For me, I would definitely use an iPhone 10 over an iPhone 10s Max, mostly because of that jailbreak. Even though I said I don't jailbreak my main devices, sometimes I will. It's just a cool little feature to have. Also, that size speaks out a lot more to me. And really, I don't think besides the size, you're getting that big of an upgrade, really. Yes, performance is better. Yes, I guess the camera quality is a little bit better. And maybe the battery life is just slightly better. But it's just a slightly bigger upgrade. If I can find an iPhone 10s Max for as cheap as I could find an iPhone 10, then maybe I would go for it. But as of right now, I mean, for me personally, I would probably pick up an iPhone 10. But the iPhone 10s Max is still a tremendous phone. You have so much going for it. It's even newer than the iPhone 10, so it's probably going to last longer. But between them, I don't know. I might go for the iPhone 10. Maybe, I would go for the iPhone 10s Max if I found it for cheaper. But a price per dollar standpoint, I think I would probably go for an iPhone 10 instead. So that really pretty much covers it up there. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those things are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.